Tom and Tom. Take your Bible, 1 Samuel 26, and the outlines are over there, also the devotional, and I'm standing on top of my prayer request sheet. Let me begin with Faltering Faith is what I titled this, and this will be our last study of David in the wilderness year. So I wanted to cap it off, and moving forward, we've already looked at 27. I looked at that in my Sunday school class, Nabal and Abigail, I believe it is. And then we looked last Sunday or the Sunday before at Saul and his death on the battlefield. And so we've already looked at that, but I didn't want to skip these two chapters here. So 26 and 27. We're going to begin with a big word, integrity. You don't hear that word much anymore, but that's probably because there's so few people that have it. Integrity is not the flu. Integrity, though, is something very, very rare. And I wanted to begin with your thoughts on when you hear or you say of someone they have integrity, what is it that you're talking about when someone has integrity? Go ahead. They do what they'll say they'll do. They're people of their word. They speak truth.
Doing what's right when no one else is watching.
Yeah, that's the classic one. Integrity is doing what is right when no one else is watching, right? Someone else.
Delivering what you promised.
Delivering what you promise.
Will not bend under pressure.
Will not bend under pressure.
Lacking in Washington.
That's not a definition, that's an observation. But it is a truth, I'll give you that, all right? I put up here this slide, I don't know what these are called, but I thought it kind of captures a lot. We might disagree with a little bit of it that is there. But let me give you my thought. First of all, the very definition of integrity means whole or complete, lacking in nothing. That is the essential nature of integrity. Another thing is that integrity is a one-minded, one-hearted man or woman, not a double-minded. So the James chapter 1 would be just the opposite of a man of integrity. For this is a double-minded man, unstable in all of his ways. So Rich was right as we look at leadership in the world that we live in. It's not just in Washington. It's in the pulpit. It's in our families where there's a lack of integrity. I'm old enough that I remember my dad making a deal with somebody. It might be buying a tractor or whatever, and they just did it on a handshake, and that's all it was. It was just you wanted to be known as a man of your, as she said, a man of your word. You wanted to be known. When you spoke, people knew that it was true. So I wanted to begin with that because here's the other thought. Integrity. It takes a lifetime to establish, but it can be destroyed in one sinful, foolish act. Many of you have been in church most of your life. You've had probably in a church somewhere, or you've been with people and you had held them up somewhat like on a pedestal. Don't mean that in a literal sense, but one day they disappointed you. And for some people, it's a disappointment that sadly they never recover from, right? I mean, people get upset and they just walk away from Christ even, And we could argue what kind of people are they. I'll give you a brief story. When I was first saved, there was a man that he was, Sunday school superintendent. You ever heard of one of those? Yeah. All right, Sunday school superintendent. And he was always one. I don't know why this church did it, but he would get up and he would announce how many were in Sunday school. And, he had somewhat of a leadership position. And I remembered something happened, and I was still young, and I don't grasp it all, but something happened in a business meeting, and it got ugly, And this man stormed out. It was only like a couple of weeks later he was at this party on a Sunday afternoon. Like, he totally walked away, not just from church, but from the Lord, on a Sunday afternoon. And in the middle of a party, they found him dead, drowned at the bottom of a pool. And I remember, I'm young, I'm at church on a Sunday night, and somebody announces that brother so-and-so was found dead today. And for me, that is something that has stuck with me over the years. I can't tell you how many times I've thought about that man, because in effect, I'm not saying that God drowned him in the pool, you understand, but I am saying that he was admired, but he lacked integrity. And my lasting memory of him wasn't of what he had been, but of what he became. Do any of you have observations and things like that you would want to share? Yeah, Rich.
I may have told you once before, but I don't know if anybody else has heard. But anyway, we were members of a small church in Jamesburg, New Jersey before we came to Florida, 27, 28 years ago. And at the time, I had just become a Christian. 2 weeks later, they asked me to be a trustee. I became a trustee, and then when I told them that Patty and I were moving down to Florida, they had a list of about 5 to 6 men that they were looking to replace me on the board of trustees.
There was trustees different, more like a deacon or
No, trustees was maintaining the building.
kind of like it is here then. Okay.
Anyway, make a long story short, I left. The one of the 5 that I had said, please do not elect this man, they elected. I didn't tell them why, but I just had a feeling. About 3 months later, I get a letter from one of the other trustee members with a newspaper clipping in it, where they had arrested him for drug possession.
Wow.
Right, they picked.
Wow. And of course that brings a scandal to the Lord's name, doesn't it, as a result of that?
And on the paper, my friend Bob had written, who was also on the book, you were right.
Yeah. So people will disappoint you, right? That's why we don't put them on pedestals. People will disappoint you. Let me deal with David a little bit. David's integrity. You have your Bible, 1 Samuel chapter 26. And you might know the story of the Ziphites. I don't know if you remember this story. I don't have all the verses up here, so this will not be the night to be lazy, all right? So you're going to have to go to the Bible and look. But in 1 Samuel chapter 26, we have the story about the Ziphites. Now, David's still living in the wilderness, and this is after his meeting where Saul sought some privacy in a cave. Do you remember us talking about that recently? And David spared his life. David cut off the bottom of his robe and proved to Saul that I had the opportunity to kill you. I didn't kill you. And Saul that day said, "Oh, David, my son," and he waxed eloquent about how David had spared his life and he had not meant harm. And so Saul established a covenant that day with David and even confessed that he believed that David would eventually be the king. So that much. And so they parted company and all lived happily ever after. That's not true. Because when you come to 1 Samuel chapter 26, Saul has heard that David is living in Judah and out in the wilderness area. And so what does Saul do? Is he a man of integrity? And the answer is no. He never is a man of integrity. And so I'm going to invite you to look with me then at 1 Samuel 26 and verse 1. And the Ziphites came unto Saul to Gibeah, saying, "Doth not David hide himself?" Now I'm going to pause there. The Ziphites were men of Judah. Now, I say that because David was a man of what? The tribe of Judah, right? Christ is of the tribe of Judah. The tribe of Judah is the royal tribe. And so as we come here and we're looking at the Ziphites betraying David, they're actually betraying one of their own. However, we don't have time to go back. This isn't the first time the Ziphites betrayed David. This is the second time. And so for David, he is not taken back by it, But this is like being betrayed by your family, okay? They are of Judah, and they betrayed him to Saul. Now, I'm going to pick it up at verse 2. Saul arose then and went down to the wilderness of Ziph, having 3,000 chosen men of Israel with him to seek David in the wilderness of Ziph. And then Saul pitched in the hill of Hakilah, which is before Jeshimon. I hope I'm saying that right, by the way. But David abode in the wilderness, and he saw that David came after him into the wilderness. David therefore sent out spies and understood that Saul was come in very deed. Now, the point is this. With David, he had this covenant agreement with Saul. They had parted ways. David has even agreed, I will not kill your lineage, right? But now here's Saul. He's broken covenant. He's gone back into the wilderness. He is hunting down David. And you might know a little bit of this background here. So in verse 3, he's pitched camp in the wilderness. In verse 4, David sends spies to find out exactly, is Saul there? What is he doing? So he's done that in very deed, was indeed come. That Saul did indeed has come and encamped. And so we pick it up at verse 5. And David arose and he came to the place where Saul had pitched his tent. And David beheld the place where Saul lay. Now, so he's up on a hillside. He's looking out. Here's 3,000 soldiers camped in the valley. And he's looking if Saul is in the midst of them. Now, how would he know if the king is in the midst of the 3,000 troops? Do you know how? Where would, huh?
His tent was in the middle and everybody else camped.
Right. He would be in the middle. Probably the royal banner would be up. And all of the soldiers are encamped around Saul. So he's looking out and he sees that. Let's pick it up again at verse 5. And David beheld the place where Saul lay, and Abner's the captain of Saul's army, the son of Ner, the captain of his host. And Saul lay in the trench, literally in the midst, encircled by the soldiers, and the people pitched round about him. Verse 6. Then answered David and said to Ahimelech the Hittite, and to Abishai the son of Zeruiah, brother to Joab, saying, who will go down with me to Saul to the camp? And Abishai said, I will go down with thee. Now, I'm going to keep reading. And so David and Abishai came to the place by night. Behold, Saul lay sleeping within the trench, that is, within the midst, his spear stuck in the ground at his bolster. Bolster is at his head, basically a pillow. But Abner and the people lay round about him. So Abner, the captain of the host, is sleeping close to the king. His job is bodyguard, right? That's his responsibility that he has there. Now, let's keep reading. And then said Abishai, I'm picking it up at verse 8. Then said Abishai to David, God hath delivered thine enemy into thine hand this day. Now therefore, let me smite him, let me kill him, I pray thee, with the spear, even to the earth at once, and I will now smite him the second time. I won't have to strike him twice. Let me take his own spear, and I'm going to thrust it in him in such a way I won't have to do it again. He's a dead man. So we've got this conversation going between David and this Abishai that is with him. Pick it up at verse 9. And David said to Abishai, destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? David said, furthermore, as the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his days shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. Verse 11, the Lord forbid that I should stretch forth my hand against the Lord's anointed, but I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is at his bolster, at his head, the cruse of water, and let us go. Now, I wanted to pick it up, the temptation to kill Saul. So here's the first thought that goes with that. David had the chance to kill him, and Abishai tempted him, spiritualizing the opportunity. This is a God moment, David. This is your hour, you know, and obviously the temptation is there. Here's your moment. You can kill your enemy. But what happens then at that point? I'm going to skip ahead. I've already done this. is this. David was confident God would remove Saul in his time and way. You know, one of the things in life, I don't know if you wrestle with this, but I don't want to get ahead of God. Do you ever wrestle with that? You're going to make a decision, but what is the right decision? When is the right decision? Because I don't want to be ahead of God's will. I want to be in the center of his will. But Abishai says, it's your moment, strike and kill him. Now, let me walk it through just a little bit more. I think this is up here. 1 Samuel 26:10. And so David said, furthermore, as the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. 3 ways that David said Saul will die. He's either going to die because the Lord's going to smite him, or he's going to die because his day will come, day appointed unto men wants to die, right? Or he shall go into battle and he shall perish. So David says God's going to take care of him. Another thought then. Here is a thought I think for all of us, and it's one that I often look at. You try to decide responsibility of dealing with someone or some difficulty. And there are some things that you can be patient and say, God can take care of this. There are other things that you have to say, but am I the instrument that God's wanting to use to take care of a problem? Okay? So here's a thought regarding appointments or the king. Promotion cometh neither from the east, nor from the west, nor from the south, but God is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another. Now, let's draw that into 2020. I went to bed on 2020 in November, and I thought we had reelected Donald Trump. I woke up the next morning and found out, no, it looks like we've elected Biden. Right? And then you had all these pictures of thousands and thousands of voter ballots that are being fed into machines at nighttime. And all of a sudden, not only do you have Trump receiving more votes than any president in history, but you've got Biden, who never came out of the basement, receiving more than he did. In fact, there were more people voting in some districts than there were people that lived in the district, right? We know that happened. We know that happened. Here's the thought, though. Joe Biden's not my choice. But God can take care of Joe Biden. Right? He can. God is judge. He putteth down one, he setteth up another. I've seen that happen in my lifetime so many times. I was young. Goldwater is right. Goldwater was running against Johnson. Some of you help me out. 1964, right? And Goldwater was supposed to be a shoo-in, right? But instead, it ended up being Johnson. Am I getting that right? Lyndon B. Johnson, right? Right. 2000 was it, the election? Al Gore, George, George H. Bush, George W. Bush, right? And you watch all of this stuff going on, back and forth. We are still, I think, the most powerful nation in the world. But we have seen men going into office that even stuns us who follow politics. Can we be confident that God is in control? And he doesn't make a mistake, does he?
Nope.
You know? I mean, you look at the story here. I know we're going back 3,000 years, but with Saul, there's a lot not to like about Saul, right? I mean, there really is. And yet David, each time he's had an opportunity to kill Saul, he's gone back and referred to him as the Lord's anointed. What do you think?
I think you could take it a step further back because people were running the king, right? And
obviously God had his plan to put Saul there.
Right.
We see how Saul handled that responsibility.
Right.
And you can kind of compare that to what's going on in the U.S. because there's so much ungodliness.
Yeah.
There's so much, that's why Biden's sitting there, I believe.
Yeah.
Because that's what the people want, right? So
Yeah. Well, you're right with Saul. The people demanded a king. We've got to have a king. And God said to Samuel, then give him the king.
Right.
Right? Well, that king became a curse to him. And the same thing is true. I do think as a nation that, sadly, I believe we're under God's judgment. And we're getting again and again exactly what we deserve. You know? If we weren't, there would be a loud cry that this is wrong. But there's not. It's muffled.
I think it's a testimony to David's faith that he resisted that. I mean, you have to take into stock. He was a man of war.
Oh, yeah.
And killing people,
This isn't a boy. This is a giant killer.
killing people is nothing for him.
Right.
It's the man who went and got 100 foreskins without even thinking about
Yeah,
it. You know?
yeah.
So killing them, knowing that he was promised the kingship, and he could settle all the angst with one swipe of the spear. And it's his temperament. Here's a man who is often led by his desires, his emotions.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
And, so it is a testimony to his faith that he actually, this is the Lord's anointed. And that there was a clinging to a truth that would serve us well. You get a few, we're taught to get a few good principles and live by them.
All right.
And
Right.
one of those is let God rule.
And at the same time, David knowing he was
That's right.
God's anointed heir to the throne. And
God sees everything.
and he could have said, you know what? It's my time for us.
Exactly.
But he knew that God would not honor that.
But we don't have a God's anointed now, do we? The position is anointed.
Yeah. I don't know that I would say he's anointed, but I would say he's been chosen for such a time. It would be trying to rationalize Hitler in Germany. You couldn't say Hitler is the anointed, but he was for such a time. It's interesting watching history. Yeah, Greg?
Our ability to recognize whether or not God has put in place a leader who is as wicked as Hitler, for example, hinges on our ability to see God's plan from his point of view,
Yeah.
which we struggle with quite heavily
Yeah.
in our limited fashion.
Yeah.
Looking backward at David and Saul and Solomon, and that it's much easier to see God's point of view at that time. But today, with a Biden who is as even the
As wicked as Saul, for sure.
God removes kings and sets up kings, he sets up and he replaces another. We know that all authority is given by God.
Yeah.
And so when we don't understand the wickedness of the authority, we have to trust that God
Yeah.
is greater than that wickedness.
Yeah. Fortunately, we live in I was going to say a democracy. Really, we live in a republic. And we have a voice. We do have a voice. We're not under a monarch. Actually, he's supposed to be serving us. I saw an interview recently where some man said to the president, "You're serving us," and his response was, "I'm not serving you."
Yeah.
Well, in effect, he is serving us. And so in a republic, you have a voice.
That's right.
But the responsibility is you have to be a steward of your voice and that opportunity that comes with it. Yeah, Jim.
It's bleak as we see all these situations, as we mentioned Hitler. Hitler took 6 million Jews, God's chosen people, and murdered them.
And far more Gentiles.
Yeah, another 7 million of
Yeah.
them Europeans. So when you try to figure out why we're not going to understand.
No, no.
His ways.
The only thing I would add to Dwight's question, Isaiah 45, God calls Cyrus his anointed.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
And the situation there, the anointed has to do with his choice, which is inseparably linked to his purpose.
All right.
So Cyrus was a Gentile, did not know God. In fact,
No.
God tells him, I girded thee though thou hast not known me.
Yeah.
So,
And I believe that prophecy was 100 years before he was born,
Right, yeah.
which is fascinating.
Yes.
Fascinating. Let me moving on with this here. 1 Samuel 26, then verse 11. The Lord forbid that I should stretch forth my hands against the Lord's anointed. I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is at his bolster, cruse of water, and let us go. Now, David had a plan, right? And the plan is he's going to prove once again to Saul, I could have killed you, and I chose not to. Let me go to my notes here. I want to make sure that I cover what I wanted to at least say in this. Let's pick this up if you have your Bible. And I wanted to give you some thoughts that go with this. Well, this leads into that. Let me pick it up at verse 13 through 16. I love this here, the moment in which David is calling to Saul down in the valley. So let's pick it up at verse 13. Then David went over to the other side, stood on the top of a hill afar off, far enough that Saul and his men couldn't shoot spears and kill him. Then David went over to the other side, a great space being between them, and David cried to the people, Abner, the son of Ner, saying, Answerest thou not, Abner? Now, Abner, right, captain of the guard, he's the general, he's the head of the army, he's the body keeper for the king, he's protecting the king. And Abner answered, and he said, Who art thou that criest to the king? And David said to Abner, Art not thou a valiant man? Who is like to thee in Israel? Wherefore then hast thou not kept thy lord the king? And there came one of the people in to destroy the king, thy lord. This thing is not good. You can hear David, he's lecturing this veteran warrior, right? This, who knows how big and mighty Abner was. He would have been a powerful figure. And so here's David really, he's mocking him, right? He's attacking. What kind of man are you? Verse 16, the thing is not good that thou hast done. As the Lord liveth, ye are worthy to die, because ye have not kept your master, the Lord's anointed. So it's kind of interesting. His failure to keep guard of the king should have been capital punishment, right? He failed in his duty. You should be dead. You should be killed. Continuing reading. And now see, here's the spear, the cruse of water that was at your head, at the bolster. And Saul knew David's voice. And he says, Is this thy voice, my son David? And David said, It is my voice, O my lord, O king. And he said, Wherefore doth my lord thus pursue after his servant? For what have I done, or what evil is in my hand? One thing I've noticed in reading, David, each time he deals with the authority figure, Saul, he doesn't, he addresses Saul in a respectful way. He doesn't make accusations, he questions him. And I think he's doing really what we should all do when we're dealing with someone that has done wrong. You want to provoke their conscience. You want to pierce their conscience. So the questions that are being asked are questions to cause Saul to think, to pause and think. Let me give a couple of things then that goes with. Then Saul said, how did he respond? I have sinned. Return my son David, for I will no more do thee harm. Well, David's smart enough. He's not going to go back and become shish kebab in the palace. So, it's very kind of you to invite me to the palace, but I ain't going, all right? But for I will now more do thee harm, because my soul was precious in thine eyes this day. Behold, I have played the fool and have erred exceedingly. Now, with Saul, did he repent? No, he hasn't repented. But he has seen his wrong. And I think that's significant in his response to the question. 1 Samuel 26:25, Saul said to David, Blessed be thou, my son David. Thou shalt both do great things and also shalt still prevail. So David went on his way and Saul returned to his place. As far as I know, I believe this is the last time they meet in the scriptures. So this is the last meeting. And I find it interesting with David, with Saul, that David parts being affirmed by his enemy. You will do great things and you will prevail. So in that sense, I believe, again, we have Saul acknowledging that David is the anointed to the throne. He really is. Let me keep going. Thought that goes with that. David did not allow the treachery of the Ziphites to embitter his heart. I thought that was important, because it's like your family betraying you. And if you harbor anger or bitterness in your heart, you can lose God's blessing. Okay? So my point with you with David is he could have been all about what the Ziphites had done. Well, they were just a tool of his enemy, who was Saul. But he didn't, in here at least, in his actions, we don't sense a bitter soul. We still sense, I think, a rational man of God in dealing with that. Now, I want to rush on because I'm not going to fill in your outline if I don't. Doubt and despair often follow on the heels of triumph. It's interesting. After 1 Samuel chapter 26, you come to chapter 27, and David's moaning and groaning. He's in a woe is me place in life. One thing I have learned in life, and many of you probably could give testimony to this, I've often, when I've experienced God's blessing in a wonderful way, it's almost immediately after it, there's a hard blow that comes, and I'll find myself getting discouraged or even depressed. I don't say I stay in the funk, but we all get discouraged, right? So let me walk it out just a little bit. 1 Samuel 26, David experienced victory over Saul. Saul's confession of, that I acknowledge you. You will do great things. But we come to 1 Samuel 27, and David has lost sight. In fact, if you have your Bible, and I don't think I do have it on the PowerPoint. So I wrote this down as a thought, viewing life through the eyes of fate rather than the eyes of faith. Only believers can look at life through eyes of faith. The world tends to look at life through the eyes of fate. They have a word, karma, is it? Karma. Well, here's where we find David, though, just for 3 thoughts. David's despair. David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. When you start talking to yourself and not meditating on the Lord, but you are focusing on woe is me, you're in a bad place, and you need to get out of that place as fast as you can.
Pastor from Chicago, I'm sure it wasn't unique to him, but he said, if you're listening to yourself versus preaching to yourself, you're going to be in trouble.
Oh yeah. Woe is me, licking our wounds. We can, and some people stay there. They live there, and we don't recognize the impact that our own thoughts are having ultimately on our actions. So David's despair. David said in his heart, "I shall now perish one day." When that one statement, he's forgotten God's promises. He's anointed to be the next king by Samuel. That's God's plan. Even his enemy has said, David, you're going to do great things. But literally, we come to the next chapter, and he's woe is me. Here's another. The fear of man. I wanted to put this up as a passing. The fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe. If you are afraid of someone, you are their slave. If they can intimidate you, if you've got a spiritual bully in your life or a physical bully in your life, if you remain in that place of fear, you become their slave. You're in their trap. All right, moving on. David's departure. And David said in his heart, I shall now perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should speedily escape into the land of the Philistines. And Saul shall despair of me to seek me any more in any coast of Israel, so shall I escape out of his hand. It's interesting, isn't it? In order to get away from one enemy, guess where he runs to? Another enemy, right? This time he's running into the Philistines' land itself. But even more so than that, he runs into the king of Gath. Gath was the home of Goliath. Now, think about the irony of that. So here, I'm going to keep going. David's destination. I wish I had time to deal with it. But David takes his 600 men, all of their wives, their children, and he goes down to Gath along with his own family. Well, he stays there for quite a season. In fact, it's 16 months he's living among the Philistines until such time that Israel is going to war against the Philistines. Then David's got a problem. This is after 16 months. David's got a problem. He's with the Philistines. He's been running raids. They think he's running into Judah and attacking the children of Israel. And he's becoming a very wealthy man living in Ziklag is where he ended up settling. He's a very wealthy man. They think he's attacking Israel. He's actually attacking the enemies of Israel and causing the king of Gath to think that David's doing us favors. He's plundering the enemy. What he was really doing was killing everybody whose town he would plunder and taking all that they had, and he and his men were becoming very wealthy. So we read in verse 12, I know I've got to finish, Greg. Achish believed David, saying, he hath made his people Israel utterly to abhor him. Therefore he shall be my servant forever. The irony of that, the king of Gath thinks David's my friend. David's not his friend. Thirdly, there are consequences when believers make decisions based on human reasoning at the sacrifice of obedience to God. I don't have time to read all of this, so I'm going to tell you the quick story. David ends up being asked by the king of Gath, my Philistine captains of war do not want you and your 600 men to go with us into the battle against Israel, because they're afraid that in the middle of the battle, David and his men, they'll turn their swords and spears against the Philistines and start fighting for Israel. So you might remember the story that they send David and his men back to Ziklag where they were living. David, as he's approaching Ziklag, do you remember what he sees in the distance? He sees the city is on fire. They've left their sons, their daughters, their wives. They've left them all back at Ziklag, and the place is ablaze. They have destroyed everything that they had taken. And so they start chasing out who did this. They find an Egyptian along the way. He told them who attacked them. I think it was Ammonites. And so David and his men go hunting them down. But the story goes, and I wish I had time to tell it, that when his men saw what had happened to their wives and their children, David is no longer a hero. They're ready to kill him. They're ready to kill him. Let me go back to the point then. Consequences when believers make decisions based on human reasoning at the sacrifice of obedience to God. And I think that's one of the great principles that I take when I look at chapter 27 here. During the 16 months that David was in the Philistine territory and staying in Ziklag, I do not believe that there is not even one psalm that you find that was written during that time. Furthermore, in chapter 27, you never see David calling on the Lord in prayer during those 16 months. But he was becoming very wealthy, starting to becoming very powerful. And so I wanted to close with this here as a thought, and I know my time is gone. When it comes to troubles and trials, we got to make sure that we respond biblically, that we think biblically. David did the right thing when it came to Saul. He could have killed him twice. He could have killed him. But he was confident in who God is, God's wisdom, God's providences. And so he determined to trust the Lord. But that last time he fled Saul, sadly, and went right to the Philistines. Sometimes you find yourself in life running from one circumstance that is uncomfortable, only to find yourself in one that is even worse. Make sure that when we make decisions in life, that we do so in obedience to God and His Word. My time.